You kind of lost me at data transfer. I don't know what's going on.
FTP, file transfer protocol.
Now, what we have to remember is that not every position can be changed to every other position.
And making sure that the users we have now stay happy and stay on while trying to attract some other people to play it.
It makes my home, but
yeah. No, that's over in a heartbeat. Ain't got any problem with that.
I don't know why we have lost the video, so bear with me just a second. Going this way. All right. Hey, how about that? I wonder if it had something to do with the images I was trying to share. Anyway, got some new equipment, so hopefully this isn't indicative of having new equipment. It's just a situation where it was operator error. This is TTATO, and this is season 3, episode 8, I believe. So if I'm wrong, correct me, but I do believe that's what it is. And we'll be talking a little bit today about some of the tutorials. Matter of fact, we're going to go ahead and see how that works before I bring one of our folks that are in the back room. I'm going to try to play it and see how it works for you guys. Let's see. I'm going to play a tutorial for you guys. In this tutorial, we're going to discuss the basic principle of initially taking over a team at the D2 level when you have moved up from D3. There are some differences from D3 and D2, D1A, and D1AA. Those upper 3 divisions are pretty much the same as far as your opportunities and options and controllability of your roster and team makeup and practice and all that kind of good stuff, depth chart especially. So we're going to go through a series of videos to show those coaches who are moving up from D3 for the first time what they can expect to see. And with this is a team I just took over. It is a D2 team, and it is the last day of the coaching change period, which is the first 3 days after the season has concluded its national championship game. That allows some coaching changing within that world to happen. The other thing is why that's important is because prior to the rollover, which is the time frame from the new coach hire, which happens after the coaching change period. Each of those are 3 days. Right in the middle of that, when that transition happens, that's what's referred to as rollover. And that's very important because prior to rollover, if we go down and look at the roster, you will see that you have 50 players on your roster. Those are the players that were playing and on that team for the just concluded season. On this roster, you'll see a couple things noteworthy: who signed them. And this team has been a sim AI for many years, so there's no human coach listed here. You will see the weight and height, which both of those columns are irrelevant. It's simply eyewash. It means absolutely nothing, has no bearing in the game in any way, shape, or form. You'll see the year, and that's where you'll see the asterisks indicating that that player has received a red shirt sometime in his career with this particular school. You'll see the position, hometown. Most importantly, you'll see potential. indicated in color codes, of course, very high, high, average, low, and very low. So you want to get those high and very high players if you're going to be sticking around the school for some time and grow them into their full potential. Also on this page, you'll have your substitution level, which you can change either individual lines, or if you want to do the whole position, you can change it right here and everything changes. You must hit that save button. Otherwise, it's going to revert back to the 85, which is your default. Now, what we want to look at on the recruiting page, we're going to leave that. We don't want nothing to do with that. On the recruiting page, this is where you will see the recruits that were scouted during the regular season. If the team that you're taking over was a sim team previously, as this one was, there will be no recruits listed here because sim teams do not send out assistant coaches for in-season scouting. If there's players here, that means that your team that you just took over had a human coach the concluding season, or the previous season, if you will. Because when a team is human coached, the computer program will automatically send out assistant coaches to do scouting for, I think it's like 4 players during the season, and you'll see them listed here. The other thing that you'll see is how many scholarships you're going to have open and your budget remaining. Now, prior to rollover, the scholarships is going to show 0 because you still have your full 50-man roster. Unless, of course, the previous coach, before he left after the conclusion of the season, used the rescind scholarship option and cut a player before he moved on, or 2 or 3 players. And that's more in depth that we'll discuss at a later time. But for general purposes, this will be 0, and when you're taking over a team, this will also be 0. On the rescinding aspect, that's where, back on this page, you can actually click rescind and cut up to 3 players prior to that rollover. Once that rollover occurs, the rescind scholarship option is no longer available because you have your scholarships allocated already, and you're not going to get any more once the rollover happens. So that rescind scholarship option will disappear. When you hit the rescind scholarship option, the pop-up tells you that, you know, this is something that you need to confirm you want to do. And if you want to cut him, you hit OK, and he is off your team immediately. There's no way to get him back. He's gone. Now, you have to understand, too, that by cutting a player, it will ding your reputation to some degree. The exact amount has a variety of influences based on was that player a player that you signed? And now we're talking about subsequent seasons. If he was a player that you signed and you cut him, then the ding on your reputation is going to be a little bit more than if you were a sim player. Also, if you cut one player, you may not even see that ding. For instance, if you're at A+ reputation and you cut a sim player, you may still be at A+ after that player is cut. And the next player you cut that's a sim player, your reputation may drop down to A or A-. Now, again, if you cut a player that you signed, it'll probably drop from A+ to A and A- on your first cut. As far as the information where they're from and what state and hometown, if these had been a human coach team ahead of time, you can kind of glean a little bit of information as to where that coach was seeing some success recruiting as a particular area. For instance, if you're coaching a Texas team and you see a bunch of Texas guys on here, you know he has a lot of good luck in that area. If for whatever reason you see another state that's heavily targeted, it may be because there's no school in that state with a human coach nearby that he had to battle a recruit for. He basically went in, fought some sims, and was able to land some players. So I always like to see what state or what area of the particular U.S. the recruits are coming from when it's a human coach team. Because again, it kind of gives you an insight where he was able to find a little success that you may be able to duplicate. Believe that's going to do it for this initial video. So check us out for additional videos after this one. Thank you much. Interesting stuff. Hopefully somebody got some information from that. New or just refresher, either way, it's always good to hear it again, if you will. One of the things that I like about the videos is that in making the tutorials, I find myself having to ask and answer my own questions. I'm being presumptuous. What does a new coach to D2, first time ever in D2, experience, and what do they expect? So as I'm trying to make the videos, I'm having to go back to the basics, and I've realized that there are some things that I've not been using or have just pushed to the side that are in fact important. So it's always nice to get more info to folks, but it's really nice if you do that and it helps yourself in the process. Anyway, in the back, we've got indpnt1. He was on our last show, and we also had Reggie on that show, so the time was split. But let's go ahead and welcome him on board. Once again, how we doing there, Mr. indpnt1?
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be on the show.
Well, glad you're back again. And for those who missed the last show, you and I talked early on about some various GD stuff, and lo and behold, Reggie was able to get in. And after that, it was pretty much just a free-for-all with Reggie, everybody asking him questions and interacting. So that made for a good show. But for those that weren't or haven't seen that episode, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and things of that nature so they can get caught up.
Well, I was born in the Washington, D.C. area. A bit all over the place, been in the Army. Lived in Los Angeles. While I was in the Army, I was stationed in Japan. I attended the University of Maryland, was a huge University of Maryland basketball and football fan years ago, and not so much now. A big Redskins fan, not too happy with what they've done with that franchise. I think Daniel Snyder's personality has completely taken over. And
unfortunately,
work for the federal government and live in Virginia presently. And I've got 3 teams on What If Sports, Gridiron, 3 different profiles, 1 team on each profile. I've been playing the game for about 3 years now. And I think you asked me last time how I found What If Sports. And actually just by accident. I mean, literally, I've been looking for a football simulation game, a college football simulation game for years and years and years. And I would have been playing What If Sports 20 years ago if I knew it had existed. But just by accident found it 3 years ago, and I've done okay. There are better coaches out there. I like to think of myself as a top 10 percenter. So I'm better than most, but there is a good chunk of coaches out there that I struggle with, and who either have dedicated more time to it, or they're smarter than me, or they're better than me, or they're luckier than me, or they're whatever. But I'm okay, I think, and I'm actually improving in this game. Little bit by little bit, I think I'm putting it all together, but not quite there yet.
Now, have you had any involvement in coaching in real life, whether it's youth teams or adult teams? I know being in the military, we have some adult teams at various levels. So, and I coached some of those. Did you have any coaching background?
No coaching background. I have a lot of background in simulations, and not just football simulations, but organizational simulations. I love building organizations. Mm-hmm. And this generally applies here for football teams, but I also love war simulations where you're building military organizations or whatever. So I think organization is everything, and obviously bringing good talent in is important, and there are a lot of other things that are important too. But organization is the most important thing, and that's what really drives me. I used to play the EA Sports football Every year I'd buy the new disc or whatever. And I would recruit and I would build the organization and I would ignore everything else. I wouldn't even, everybody else likes to run down the field. I like to recruit and I like to build organizations. And What If Sports is just about perfect for that. So I've had a great time playing. I enjoy the competition. And for those coaches who get the better of me, I'm doing my best to try to close the gap.
There are days when I think I've got it figured out, only to wake up the next morning and realize I have no clue. So it's just it's a matter of who you're up against, and I think that's one of the things I like about this game. Even you mentioned EA Sports, even in those platforms, there are times when you sense that you have figured out how to do what to make it work best for you, even in those games, if it's a particular play or if it's a particular formation, whatever the case may be, you get that sense of this is how I have continued success. What If Sports GD does not allow for that, simply because you have the human factor using numerous possibilities. When we're talking about quality of player, positional analysis, you've got the game plan part of it, you've got the playbook component, you got your formation layout, you got your position roles. There are so many potential combinations with all those variables that not one person can really truly say they have figured out all aspects of the game. Now, granted, like you said, there are just some coaches who seem like they have a knack for getting that extra point or getting that extra touchdown or getting that extra yard when many of us struggle with that particular phase of a game for whatever reason. And it's those coaches who have, earned the wins that they have because they have either developed the process or they have figured out what works best in this. It's not even X's and O's, it's ones and zeros, for crying out loud. So when you go to apply like me, I tried to apply a lot of my coaching philosophy into this game, or I did early on. And a lot of those aspects really don't matter in this game because it is a computer program. It doesn't care about your height and weight, as we saw in that tutorial earlier. Those are just numbers. It's just it's face wash or eye wash, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, the coaches out there who enter this game initially, and because they have coached even at the collegiate level, you're going to see that this game doesn't parallel the coaching mindset or philosophy step by step all the way through. There's some similarities, but for the most part, you figure out the ones and zeros and you got it made.
Well, yeah. And yeah, a lot of it is work ethic. There's some coaches. There's nothing that pisses me off more than for a coach who I know has only been in the system for like a year to start beating the hell out of my team every single year. And you try to figure out, what has this guy figured out? This guy has figured something out. And I give you a couple examples of that. S. Cottrell, you've had him on your show.
Yeah, Sean. Yeah.
I used to wipe the field with him, and then suddenly he figured something out, or he through his work ethic, his study of the game, looking through the message boards, maybe contacting the right person, getting some information in site mail or whatever it was, he made a leap right over top of me. And I remember I played the same conference that he was in, and he ran back 4 touchdowns on either my punt returns or my kick returns. And I'm trying to figure out, what in the heck is this guy doing to run back all these kickoffs for touchdowns? And kudos to him. He's a great coach. He applies probably the same work ethic he uses in real life to What If Sports. He researches. He experiments. He finds things that work. He finds things that don't work. And he's what I'd call a top 5% coach, and good for him. But it's uncomfortable for me. There's another guy named Armchair, a real recent guy, you just come aboard, and he's on the message board asking questions all over the place. And I recently played him in the national championship, and he won. Congratulations. You've been here for 9 months, and I've been here for 3 years. Very humbling. Okay. But good for him. And that happens. But then you get the other side of the coin where people come on, and after 2 months or 3 months, they're wondering why they're getting beat. And it's because there's some good coaches out there, and they put a lot of effort into it, and this is a very complex game, very complex, very data-driven game. So in my mind, it's something you can understand. It's something you can figure out, but it's a very big thing to figure out. And some people have done obviously better than others. And I've been proven, I wouldn't consider myself to be a great coach or anything like that, but I'm doing pretty well, and I'm enjoying my time.
Those nuances of figuring things out and recognizing them. I don't think it's so much that it's something that they are doing versus something that they have observed, either through experimentation or the way they recruit, whatever the case may be. It's something that is there for everyone to see, but a select group of people see it easier, earlier, or more in depth than the vast majority. And it's those people, those coaches, that have taken that additional step and can take a perennial sim AI team and in 5 years have them in a national championship. Whereas me, I take a perennial sim AI team, and I'm lucky if I get double-digit wins in 5 years. That's the reality of the game. And because I have not yet reached that position where I can turn anybody into a national contender within 2 or 3 or 4 years, that kind of keeps my drive going, because I still haven't figured everything out. I'm still in search of that elusive holy grail, if you will, that cauldron of knowledge that is out there festering, and we just haven't put our hands on it yet.
Well, it's actually funny because that cauldron of knowledge comes from multiple places. For me, it's kind of gone in phases, where, of course, I bring my own organizational skills to the table when I get here. Mm-hmm. So obviously, I'm going to know some things before I arrive. And when I initially started playing a game, the main thing was just making sure the organization, the structure of the team was in place, where I had the right number of scholarships mm-hmm. in each particular class, just the way I wanted it. Made sure I had the right number of players in each position. Made sure I didn't have to start freshmen, that I could have upperclassmen starting.
Right.
And you can have a level of success with that, but obviously, there are other things to consider, like what kind of players are you recruiting into your team structure?
Exactly.
Formations. Are you recruiting good players for your formations? One thing I've been looking at recently, when I evaluate players, is I look at the individual player's starting point for the formation that I use. So if it's an offensive player, I generally use trips. If it's an offensive player, I'm going to look, is he good in the trips formation? Mm-hmm. And a good score is usually over 20, between 20 and 24. I've seen as high as 26. And that gives you less distance to go because he's already at 24. And
right.
And I'm kind of rambling here, but I've had 5 or 6 stages, 5 or 6 times in which I've taken a jump upwards, and one was just a post, or it might have been a site mail with a Chetty 1963. Mm-hmm. Where I asked him, how can I get my second stringers in the game? And he introduced me to something that, up to 2 years, I had no concept of. And that's the formation page, where you mm-hmm. create additional formations, and and I had no idea how to use that. And suddenly that just opened the game for me. Recently there was, and of course you try not to give away the house when you give advice, to young coaches, but you want to help them. But I'd say there was a guy, I don't know who he was, but he posted a video where he was explaining his offensive playbook. And for me, he was giving away the house.
Well, he could have given it to me, and I still couldn't beat him.
Yeah. Well, I took the house. Okay, it's like, okay, you just improved my offense 100%. So, and I kind of came up with a way to improve my defense 100%, like within the last 2-3 months. But it's like you just slowly improve. You figure more and more of it out. And, if you're as obsessed with, this kind of stuff as I am, as some of the other people are in this game are, eventually you're going to be tough to beat. And,
yep, definitely.
Yeah. And for those, for guys who don't mind, losing 3-4 games a year and they enjoy doing that, good for you. That's fine. But for those who lose 3 and 4 games a year, not because they have a really tough schedule, but because they're not giving as much attention to it.
Yeah,
that's the way it goes in life. Yeah. You give less attention to it than everybody else, you're going to get less results.
And that's straight across the board with everything, not just, game planning and recruiting. I mean, doing your diligence and scouting beforehand, like you mentioned, your quest to get your second stringers more playing time. And ironically enough, that's one of our videos that I was going to present tonight. Let's go ahead.
Hello, this is Majique, and today's tutorial is going to be focused on getting players playing time, specifically the freshmen who have just joined your roster. We want to try to get those guys into those 2 exhibition games after signing so that they can get maximum playing time to basically kickstart their work ethic and enhance all their other core attributes as well. So there are a variety of ways to do this. The way I've been doing it and what I have found proves quite successful for me is really simple in the mindset of keeping things to their basic level. For instance, in your formation, with this particular team, I'll be running an I formation. So if we look in our formations, that default I formation has the generic or base position names: quarterback, offensive line. We use those generic ones. We don't use QB, user 1, guard, center, possession, fullback, receiver, whatever the case may be, in this formation. You can, but for the purposes of this tutorial, I say we stick with the basics here. As far as the number values goes, that's all generic. We really don't care about winning or losing or who's getting the ball. Our primary focus is just getting people in the game. So remember, the formation is the default I formation. That's how it'll show up in our playbook opportunity as well. Speaking of which, let's go to playbook. When we look in our playbooks, I've named it preseason. This is the one that I'll be using for the purpose of getting those freshman playing times. And I've also found that I can use this throughout the season periodically in certain game situations to get those freshmen back in the game and get them playing time. Now remember I said use that generic I formation, and that's what you see here, the I formation. Again, 50% rush, 50% pass, play calling inside, outside, where the passes get distributed. None of that matters to me because, again, I'm not about winning or losing. I want to get guys in the game. So I'm making sure that wide receivers and running backs, everybody's getting their fair share of playing time. And I do this not just for first down on long, medium, and short. I just leave it the same all the way through. Because again, it doesn't matter if I'm winning or losing. Let's just get those guys playing time. So now we have discussed that the formation is I formation, and we're going to use that basic default I formation. We've embedded it into our playbook, which you see here with the I formation name. That means that those positions are the ones that will be used for this playbook. And that's important because when we go to our game plan, we want to make sure that the preseason playbook, that's what we named it, is what we're actually running. And as you can see for the playbook, in the main winning, losing, tied, overtime, it doesn't matter. I've got those
filled with the preseason playbook. That means that the situation of the game is not going to change, which guarantees that those basic I formation positions will be filled by my freshmen and will be playing throughout the entirety of the game unless they get so tired that they end up coming out. Speaking of which, let's look at that depth chart, because that's the final piece in this entire puzzle. And that is where you'll see those generic names that we talked about in the formation. Your quarterback, your running back, your wide receiver, not your QB1 or your fullback or your wide receiver deep. We put the freshman at the top of the generic or the base position list. So that's where you'll find Walden. He's my freshman. And then second is Jackson. He's a sophomore. I try to stream it down so that they can get the guys that have been on the roster previously a little playing time as well. And we'll carry it over to the running backs to show you how that's set up. There I've got a freshman, Wilson. He's in that running back position. Linebackers, I think I've signed 3 linebackers, and that would be Nelson, Sims, and Russell. And that's who you find in the first 3 positions there. So what that essentially means is that the formation will use these 3 players to fill those slots. The playbook will use that I formation to execute the playbook, and the game plan will use that preseason playbook to run throughout the entirety of the game. The other component to all of this is your roster. That is where you will see the substitution levels, 85. They're going to get pretty tired at 85, and I expect Walden to stay in the game pretty much the entirety, so he'll get an overabundance of playing time. Let's look at those linebackers that I mentioned earlier, those 3 guys. As you see, the substitution level is 85 on this. This is all part of the preseason stuff, so losing. Just want to get everybody max playing time. Now, the little caveat that I'll throw in here, and that comes into the game plan portion. This has nothing to do with the preseason stuff. This is simply what I discovered a long time ago, and I have been using it ever since. A lot of times, if I'm winning a ball game and I want to get my freshmen some more playing time, I'll actually include one of these optionals that you don't have available at D3 that you do at D2 and above. And option 1, I designated as if I'm winning by 25 points or more with 15 minutes to go in the half. That's your second quarter or your fourth quarter. To go ahead and select that preseason playbook, because now when that situation occurs, let's say that I was using something else as a playbook, like an inside run or a run and shoot or whatever you would see here, regardless of what those were, when I got up by 25 points in either the second or fourth quarter, my preseason playbook would kick in and those freshmen would come in. Now, of course, once the score decreased and I was no longer winning by 25, let's say I was winning by 23, but it was 13 minutes to go in the game, that doesn't fit either of these qualifiers, so it would revert back to your main, and my regular starters would come back into the game, and then it would run until one of these options were met if I had them ticked. So just a hint, you can do this both on offense and defense. And again, it's just a method of getting some of your freshmen in the ball game, especially when you're playing Sims. That's when this comes really important. When I'm playing another human, I generally don't try to do this because, I'm worried more about winning and losing versus getting those freshmen their playing time. And you can also use your substitution level to get freshmen in the game a little bit more. So just as a quick recap, to make this all work, first and foremost, set up the formation. In this case, I'm using I, and always use your default. Always use your generic settings here for your positions versus using the actual special identifier to break out those positions somewhat. And then make sure that in your game plan, that your game plan has the playbook that you'll be using, which is preseason, and then make sure in that playbook, the actual preseason playbook, that you're actually using the formation that is generic that you identified earlier, in this case, the I formation. And again, I don't worry about filling all this in because it's all about playing time. So hopefully that helped in some way, shape, or form. And if you've got any questions, just let me know, and best of luck. And the one thing I didn't mention from the onset is where I was showing the offensive side of that is the same is applicable in all areas on the defensive side. You can set your defensive formation to be the generic 3-4, 4-3, whatever it is, and then use those base or generic position identifiers such as linebacker or lineman, defensive lineman versus the specialized, and then structure your preseason defensive playbook the same way. And those defensive freshmen will get a lot of playing time. So that's probably similar to what Chet told you about.
Well, you know, this topic is a huge topic for having success in this game. And players can play around with those things. Once you understand the relationship between formations and playbooks and your game plan, you know, the world is, you know, has no limits.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I do, and, you know, I'm probably giving away too much here. But, you know, you have your formation page, and, you know, of course you go to whatever formation you use. I use trips, and formation number 1 is, you know, the default is going to be my starters. And then, you know, set number 2 is going to be my, you know, starters with a few almost starters sprinkled in there.
Right.
And then set number 3 is going to be my freshmen. And you know, I'll use different identifiers for each, of course. And then I will, you know, with my game plans, make sure when I want my freshmen to come in, you know, they will be assigned set number 3. And then, of course, just like you mentioned, you know, you set parameters by which you want your freshmen to come in. And, you know, in my case, you know, I want my freshmen to come in maybe, you know, whenever I'm 35 points up on my opponent. And so that really, understanding this is a huge part of becoming a good coach in the game, I think. I've kind of set a goal, and again, I'm probably giving away too much information here. I want every single one of my players to start every single game of their entire careers. And, you know, I haven't been able to achieve that. I always got 1 or 2 freshmen that aren't quite ready to get on the field yet. You know, and of course I'm discounting anyone who's redshirted. But if you look at my rosters, you will see that almost every single player I have on my team has started every single game of their entire careers. And that's the distribution I want. Of course, you know, the weaker players only come in to the game in situations where they're not going to blow the game for me. But it's something that if you can play with and get creative with, you can become a really good coach, and you can win a lot of games.
Right. Absolutely. And now there are going to be some of the newer coaches that are going to ask, well, how do you get 10 offensive linemen starts every game of their career when you only put 5 on the field at one time? Well, again, that speaks back to the real world coaching mindset that we have. You know, whoever takes that first snap, whether it's on offense or defense, that's your starter. I mean, that's what start means. That's not how it works here in Gridiron Dynasty. You could have that guy on the first snap not play another snap the rest of the game, and he doesn't get credit for a start. What details and identifies a start is a formula that roughly works out to 35% of that individual's eligible playing opportunities for the duration of the game. For instance, let's say you have 100 offensive plays, and those 100 offensive plays are running plays. And you have a running back that you're using, and whether he touches the ball or not, whether he's going out for a block as a fullback, or whether he is in fact running the ball, that's irrelevant. He is on the field for that play. So that counts toward his percentage of playing time. And let's say out of those 100 plays, he played 34 of them. Well, that's close enough to 35%, depending on the formula, which takes into consideration whether or not he was promised playing time, whether or not he's a team player, whether or not he's a senior who's expecting to play a lot more versus a freshman who's not necessarily expecting to play. All those things factor in. But if you can get about 35% playing time for those individuals, you'll notice that they will, in fact, receive credit for a start. And this is something we talked about on the show, many shows ago. And it's funny because I use either a kicker or a punter, and more times than not, I use a punter without a kicker. So essentially, I've got one guy doing both duties, which you can do in this game because even if you don't have a kicker position filled, the game will automatically use the punter for your kicking duties. And the reason I bring that up is there again, a punter, let's say you have 40, let's say you have 4 punts in one game, and my punter kicked all 4 of those. He would have 100% playing time. It's not contingent on the rest of the games that he has. It's this game. In this game, he had 4 opportunities to play. He played those 4 opportunities, so therefore he was on the field 100% of his potential opportunities. So if he's also doing kicking duties, and I have, say, 10 field goal attempts, or for simplicity's sake, 8 field goal attempts, he will have registered his 4 punt attempts as his 100%. The next 4 opportunities on the field, he serves as a kicker or intermingled in there. So now all of a sudden he's received 200% playing time. Well, now he's kicking in the second half as well, or whatever the case may be, and 4 more field goals or 4 more field goal attempts. So now he's had a total of 8 field goal attempts and 4 punts. His opportunity for playing time is only those 4 punts. But yet, if you look at his playing time, he has 300% of the plays that he's eligible to play because of all those kicking times. So if you see players skyrocket in work ethic, you're going to be looking at a kicker or a punter for that specific reason, because it all works down to why is it important to get freshmen in the game? Because if you're getting playing time, they're happier. If they're happier, they're working harder. If they're working harder, their cores are going to go up. If their cores are going up, they're becoming a better player. And it's exponential as it goes through the ranks. You'll see that early playing time will pay dividends down the road because they will have gotten a head start on that growth. Did that make sense, Joe?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, and the main thing, okay, now for my players, usually the distribution is the freshmen and sophomore get between 35 and 45% playing time, and the juniors and seniors get between 45 and 55 or maybe 60% of the playing time. And for the underclassmen in particular, their work ethics all increase. I mean,
right,
uniformly. And you want the work ethic to increase because it's going to increase their growth, their growth potential, and they're going to reach their potential. Recently, I don't want to throw any particular coaches under the bus or anything. I was coaching in a major conference, and I wasn't at an elite school, and I had a very good team at a major conference, and I had beaten one of the elite schools in my conference like 8 straight times. And he was one of those elite coaches where he was kind of struggling, and when he resigned that position, I sent him a site mail, and I told him, dude, you're playing all your players at 85% substitution rate, and your freshmen are never getting on the field, and your seniors are exhausted. That's why I'm beating the hell out of you every single time. You have better players than I have, but your players are exhausted, and my players are rotating off and on and off the field. And, this is just one of those things. Okay. I mean, there are 15, 20 things, that you can get a handle on that can make your team just a little bit better. And if you get a handle on all of those 15 or 20 things, you're going to be difficult to beat. And this is something that this particular elite coach didn't have any clue about at all. And somehow he wound up in an elite school and he was winning, he was going 9-5 every year and kicking everybody's butts on the recruiting trail. It's, this is just something that can really improve your team. Make sure you're fresh. And then another thing, when I initially started playing this game, I was thinking, this is like real football. And, when it comes to formations, real football. Okay. I use Pro Set. Now, a lot of people use Pro Set, but, Pro Set's really good in real life. There are other things you can do here, like using Notre Dame box and throw with it. Which really is difficult to handle, if you're not used to seeing that kind of an offense. And of course, I was looking at the statistics and thinking, I just had this running back, gained 1,400 yards. This quarterback threw for 3,000 yards. That's great. I'm averaging 35 points a game. My team is great. And then I see these other guys averaging 88 points a game, and their quarterbacks are throwing for 800 yards a game and everything. So, while this has a lot of similarities to real life, obviously it's a computer simulation and there's a very large disparity in talent levels. So you don't try to constrain yourself to real life. Just make your team as good as you can. And, I actually was purposely, holding my offense back because, I was trying to use psychology, trying to hide skills, and then, turn it on full blast when I'm playing against a tough opponent or something. But this isn't real football. Real football statistics don't mean anything. 1,200 yards for like your main running back is nothing. It's you got to think out of the box and just drop the idea that this is real football.
Yeah, and that's something else you bring up. You're talking about the stats, and I've fielded several questions by new coaches who are recruiting, and they see those elaborate stats at the bottom of the recruit's page of what he did in high school. And, it's eyewash. It's just like the height and weight thing. It really doesn't matter. It has no bearing on where he positions within the qualification scale in the recruiting lineup. I mean, it's just, you might as well take it off because it's just, I don't even look at it anymore. But you did also mention, for instance, throwing out of the box. And that's one of the things you can do in this game to find your niche or to separate you from having coaches use a routine defense against your formation and make them think a little bit, make them do a little bit of homework, maybe make them overthink a little bit. And that's by, no pun intended, throwing something different at them. And there's a coach on here that never recruited wide receivers, and he ran the box. He never recruited a wide receiver, even though that formation requires a wide receiver. What would happen, and I can't remember if it was a running back or a tight end, but one of the two would automatically get pulled to field that wide receiver position. So how did this help him? Well, there are two things to point out. One, he had an extra position that he did not need to recruit, which in turn allowed him to better staff some of his other positions of his choice, whether it was running back or offensive lineman. He would have what he would normally have on a roster as wide receivers, those amount of players available for those other positions, which increased his depth, which added experience, which basically gave him better players when they were seniors. The other thing it did was whoever was filling that wide receiver position was getting playing time. Now, there are people that would say, well, doesn't the wide receiver or running back playing a wide receiver position degrade the formation IQ and all those things? I would say if it does at all, it's negligible in the fact that you've got better quality players on the field in greater numbers than that one person. If he's playing, if the computer's playing or positioning a person in that position that sucks so bad that it's draining your formation IQ or your core values or whatever as a group, when those apply, then something's wrong with your lineup, because you should not have those type of players on your roster anyway. A decent tight end is going to be an adequate wide receiver, given the fact that, one, you're not throwing to him, you're running the ball, and two, he's getting playing time. So there's a lot of ways you can skin this old Gridiron Dynasty cat.
Yeah, thinking about that, and of course, this is the same argument that goes with the wishbone formation. Do you need a quarterback? Question
To hand off the ball, yeah.
Yeah. Now, in my mind, number one, if you don't have these positions on your field, it puts you in a box, and you have limited flexibility, and because at some point I may decide I want to throw.
Yeah.
And so now I could understand, let's say you're running a wishbone formation and you're a Division 1A team and you don't want to spend a lot of resources on quarterbacks. You just drop down and get, a Division 1 AA quarterback and sign him for, $3,000.
Mm-hmm.
And you use those extra resources for all the other things you want to get. And meanwhile, so in that case, you've got a real quarterback. So you're not taking that much of a drop off, but you don't need a stud quarterback. You just need a guy to hand off. And
exactly.
But at some point that player is going to develop. And if he's a senior and you've been developing him, you can take a mediocre quarterback. And in fact, this past season, I took over Tennessee 2 or 3 seasons ago. And the quarterback I presently have as a starter is quite average at best. And I finished the season 16-1. If everything else is in place, and if you're running a good playbook and you got good wide receivers or whatever, the quarterback, and in fact, this is kind of a Redskin kind of anecdote I can give you. You can have Mark Rippon playing quarterback and he'll drive the car. Okay. So, and he'll get good stats because you built a good car, he'll drive it. And, and then you'll find out 2 or 3 years later, he was very average, but,
but you still won.
Yeah. I mean, and like in the case of the Notre Dame Bucks, you're a Division 1A team. Why can't you just drop down and pick up a couple Division 1 AA wide receivers?
Yeah.
And you can pick up a couple decent 1AA wide receivers who will develop into something. And in case one day you decide you want to start throwing, you've got some wide receivers on your team.
Oh, yeah. And the same is true for shotgun. Back before the engine changed, years back, talking probably 14 years ago, you were able to just willy-nilly change positions with players however you wanted to, with very little drop off. For instance, you could take an O lineman and he'd be a monster tight end, or you could take an O lineman and make him a fullback and he would block for the entire game and be a monster. Or you could take a running back and make him a quarterback and nobody'd ever catch him. Well, those days are long gone of that willy-nilly swapping out. And now you've only got certain areas that you can actually do position changes. And that's something we're going to show on a subsequent tutorial, is how those position changes work, how they impact a player's ratings. In some cases, you'll see attributes go up, and others you'll see them drop. In some cases, work ethic goes up. Other times it drops. It depends on the position as far as where he's coming from to where he's going to. Wide receiver to running back is a little easier to do than defensive linebacker to a wide receiver. There's only certain positions that you can actually swap, and some of those will cost you, and sometimes they're not even worth it.
When it comes to changing positions of players, that's not something I do. It's something I've done in other games. Like, we talked about EA Sports, and and they modified their game over a period of years too. And I remember one particular year, you could take linebackers, and I just stopped recruiting defensive ends. because you could take a linebacker and he'd be a better defensive end than all the best defensive ends available.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now the way I look at it is, of course, I'd like the game to be as close to reality as possible. Of course, it still is a simulation, and you have to understand it's a simulation. But in reality, some high school coaches have got their players playing out of position.
Mhm.
And, there are some kids that, you do not belong in as a wide receiver. You're a defensive back. The old saying, defensive backs are nothing but wide receivers with bad hands. So there are some positions that are kind of natural swap
Right.
situations. And I'd like to kind of see that incorporated into this game. Of course, I don't want to see it run wild. But I think in rare occasions, you should have a diamond in the rough where, man, you're playing in the wrong position. If you only play wide receiver, you'd be a superstar. And then they do. And that happens in real life. It's in fact, another Redskin anecdote, Charlie Taylor. He was drafted as a running back. He was rookie of the year as a running back. They switched him to wide receiver, and he's in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Exactly. It happens in real life. So, I'd kind of like to see it happen here, but evidently, I've never had any luck with it. And so I just don't even bother with it.
Yeah. And like you said, real life, one of my smartest moves I ever made was a kid who was my guard before we ever played the first game in youth sports. And he picked up the ball one day in practice and nobody could tackle him. And his days of being a guard ended that day. And even all the way up through high school, he was a fullback or at least a halfback. And for me, the kid wasn't the fastest guy on the field in any game, but you just could not bring him down. And his forward momentum was always going forward. So, that was stereotypical of the linebacker or the guard to running back way back when in the initial evolution of what if sports, you could do that. But I'm glad those are gone because you had some ridiculous teams out there, quite honestly. Like you said, people wouldn't even recruit certain positions because they knew that they weren't going to fill them with what was available on the board.
Well, if they made it rare, okay, where just occasionally a player would turn out to be really great in another position. I'll give you another real life example. I'm a big University of Maryland fan. Randy White was recruited to the University of Maryland as a fullback. And obviously he's a Hall of Fame defensive tackle. Once they identified that this guy's a monster, you put him on a defensive line. And that's what should be.
That's where
Yeah.
He carved out his work.
Yeah. Like I said, you don't want anything to be abused. But it'd be nice, to be able to add that to the game.
Yeah. And I'm actually in the process of looking at the athletic core, that athleticism, to see how that impacts position change as far as where the value is. It's very difficult to find two guys in the same position with very similar cores, but athleticism being one that is definitely different between the two. And then the beauty of this whole position change thing, as we'll see in the video when I play it in subsequent airings, is that you can see what those changes will be before you permanently change it. So you can select the change, make him a fullback, whatever, or running back, whatever the case may be, see how those cores or those attributes fall or increase. And then if you don't like it, you just hit cancel and no harm done. But once you hit that button to say, yep, do it, you're screwed. But like I said, that's for another show. And we're going to wrap this one up. It's right on the hour. So another good scheduling time frame there, Joe. Appreciate you coming on. And
thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome to pop on with us anytime, brother. Thanks so much again. Appreciate you.
All right.
And all you fans who've been listening, we appreciate you being here as well. And forgive us for the initial blackout or whiteout or whatever it was where we didn't actually have any video from me. But looks like we got that figured out. So always improving. That's what they say. Anyway, thanks again. I'm your host, Majique. This has been TTATO and we'll see you next time around.